There were a few factors that led me to take the decision to work on this book. And one was, working as a TV news writer and producer. Like all of us, we talk about our jobs when we are with our friends and with our family. We meet new people, friends and acquaintances of those we know. And I found that quite often people would say to me, they'd complain about the news. Like the general public would complain, why is the news so negative? I'm getting tired of the news. I don't watch the news anymore. Like I was seeing that a lot of people that I was meeting in the outside world, outside of the newsroom, were just not interested anymore, and were expressing that they were being negatively affected by the news. And yet there was no discussion ever in the story meetings or within the newsroom that this was a phenomenon in the outside world. It never came up. And there was never any attempt to address that discontent. That was one factor. The other factor was my own discontent as a news worker in the newsroom. I found that it was becoming a very, very regimented factory environment, like a mass production environment with a very, very strong hierarchical top-down structure of passing down instructions. And we, over time, there was not really very much, we work in teams, but there wasn't very much collaboration between everybody. It was just a lot of orders and instructions from up top coming down and just getting stuff done as quickly as possible. Very messy work, very rushed work, a lot of copy paste from the internet and other news organizations. And I found that a lot of what we were doing was not important. It didn't necessarily represent reality as most people experienced it, in my view, or at least in my own reality. And so between the two observations, I thought, okay, there's an important book to be written here, an important idea to be expressed, that the news is somehow not does not correlate to reality, I think. And then I decided to embark on it.
Did you write it, in bits, or did you just sit down and really hammer away, get it all out of?
I knew that I wanted to express the idea that there were these filters and prisms, many of them, that were distorting stories essentially, and distorting our view of the world, that they were being introduced at different stages of the news production process. And even in terms of the way we understand information and process it ourselves as consumers. So I laid all those out from the beginning, I think, and started to work on them in sequence. I guess in parallel, also just added material as I experienced it while I was still working as a newsroom writer and producer. So it did come out in piecemeal, I would say.
But I thought your book, I found it really interesting. The kind of a haphazard, frenetic way the news is put together around negative stories all the time, is frightening people and dramatizing everything and not being interested in real investigations. This is amazing.
I think when the news media developed as an for-profit industry, I guess from its very beginnings, it always had to kind of look for ways to sell its products, whether it's the actual, the newspapers or ads for television and then now, internet ads and everything. So, there is always this idea at the forefront of news publishers and news producers' minds as to how to gain people's attention, because attention is what brings customers and their audience to them. And so anything that may sort of smack as, uninteresting or boring or not sensational or not frightening, that doesn't appeal to our primal instincts, what may be important for our survival. Anything that doesn't fall within that catch net is dropped. So it ends up becoming the stories that are chosen are those that make the loudest noise, or create a stir or cause sensation. And so automatically you have a filter there as a result. And so certain things are included very few things are included, and the great majority of goings on in the world are excluded. That includes neutral events, good news stories, or just things that aren't, like most of human life is not really newsworthy by the definition of the newsmakers.
Yeah. And they're very competitive with one another to see how sort of dramatic or sordid or they can be in their stories. And the thing is, it's all magnified now, isn't it? Because social media picks these stories up, and then you end up with rioting on the streets before you know where you are. It's just horrible, really.
Well, I think the difference nowadays, as opposed to the past, was a few things. People are getting their stories, straight into their phones, and whereas in the past we didn't, we would get our, let's say, our newspapers delivered, or news would appear once or twice a day on the television, and in past decades, and so there were certain times of the day when one would get access to that, but now it's all the time. People are on their phones all the time, and it's because online, the internet, digital, the amount of space you have is infinite. You can create as many stories as you want. And so as a result, because of this need to gain clicks and to gain attention, and news organizations are creating tons of material, way more than they ever used to. And as a result, they're kind of going lower and lower and lower, lowering the bar in terms of the significance of the stories in order to fill that quota. And so you're getting a lot of trivial stories and silly and stupid stories and just things that are not really very important. And so we're flooded as a result with all of this material. And
it's not widely appreciated that every individual has only got so much attention energy. And if your attention is constantly being harvested, really, by the news media and other types of input from the digital world, it exhausts the brain, so people can't think straight anymore.
Yeah, and I guess as a result of that, one becomes really sort of unable to distinguish between what's important and what's not important. I mean, if you become fatigued in a sense, then in a way you then lose any sort of discernment faculty, I guess, and are affected equally by everything in a way.
You certainly are, and but your book really went through all the elements of it. It's not a huge book, but all the little chapters were so spot on. I was full of admiration of how you managed to boil it all down, really.
While working, over the years, as I worked in a few television newsrooms and have worked as a freelancer for print and online, and even as a lifelong consumer of news, going all the way to childhood, because I used to watch the news along, with my parents when I was a kid. And so, I mean, you tend to kind of have observations over the course of your life, and then you bring them into the professional realm working as a journalist. But you begin to encounter different tendencies, what I call veils of distortion, over and over and over again. I mean, and we some of them are very ubiquitous, and most of the general public talk about it. The negativity bias. But what people don't know, for instance, there are a lot of other distorting factors that are less well known, because people don't work in the business, and those include things like just the way information is, at least in television, information is processed. How the news is processed behind the scenes. And so the fact that, like, nowadays, a lot of journalists copy paste stories from other sources, from the internet, the fact that we have to work very, very, very quickly in a television news environment, and it's very chaotic atmosphere, and the need to put stories out quickly, and the pressure to create new stories or updates to stories every hour in the rolling news environment, it puts a lot of pressure to come up with everything.
Journalists and presenters get burnout from the result of that, don't they? I mean, you describe that in your book as well. I mean, it's going to have a huge impact on the journalists if they can't do proper journalism and proper thinking and proper research.
Yes, and I mean, again, there's a lot of talk. You encounter stories and articles once in a while about the negative effects of news on the population. And so, I mean, if all of us on the outside consuming the news, whether more or less, are being affected by it to some degree psychologically because of the negativity and the fear mongering, I mean, imagine what the news workers have to, contend with working at ground zero, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of the presenters and the hosts have to speak on television anyway. The content of the wording of this material, and the writers have to write it, and it does have I think it does color one's view of the world, and it just changes the way you see things, I think, by conditioning.
Yes, it is conditioning, and they have a sort of distorted view of what's real and important, and that's going to feed back into the news again, isn't it? It's really
another distorting factor is nowadays with a lot of these reduced budgets, bureaus have been closed, correspondents have been pulled back to headquarters. I mean, there used to be each news organization, whether it was a newspaper or a television company, they would have their people out in the world doing their own original work. But now they've retracted, and they've become insulated in these in their buildings, in their headquarters, in their studios, and they don't really have the eyes and the ears out in the real world that they used to. And so they've become almost even more detached from reality because they're doing so much of their work virtually.
Yes, all the expertise is drained away, isn't it? Because you used to correspondents in different countries who knew the countries, knew the people, knew where to go, and that's all gone now.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's going to differ between mediums. I think newspapers, even though they are they've reduced their budgets and staffs as well. They're doing a little bit more original work and hiring freelancers and whatnot who have direct contact with their stories and their sources. But again, the TV world has pulled back from that quite a bit, and I think that also tends to reflect in their product. It doesn't reflect reality as accurately, I think, as a result.
I mean, I used to be a real news junkie when I was a child, because we always read the paper every day, and the paper, when my parents had finished with it, I read it, and gradually I realised that different papers had different political leanings and all the rest of it, and I suppose I was a news junkie, and I still am a bit. I read a couple of papers every day, and one online and one, with after my breakfast with a cup of tea. It was very nice. I enjoy that ritual. But I'm very, very aware that it's full of opinion, and an awful lot of it is not fact. And if you remember that, it's quite a good lesson, really, that when people talk authoritatively, they're only actually 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100 just offering their own personal opinion, but putting it forward as fact and news.
Right.
It's a good lesson from that point of view, but it's doing an awful lot of damage to the world now.
Part of the reason I wrote the book was to, I guess, emphasize to people that reality, whether it's one's immediate subjective reality or whether it's a more objective reality, is not tantamount to what the news says. Because again, there's a lot of opinion. There are things that are inaccurate, and really, I mean, what the news has become for a lot of people is a replacement for one's own personal observations and one's own experiences within one's immediate realm. And I think that when the news packages and presents a collection of curated stories every day, whether it's online or whether it's in a television presentation or in a paper format, that they're trying to sort of, in a way, the implication is this is your world today. This is our world today. But in fact, each and every one of our worlds is what happens to us also in our living, waking experiences at every moment in any given day. And so in a sense, one has to learn to separate what is being said about other parts of the world, other realities, other spheres, and what is actually impinging on one's own day-to-day world. They're different things. Sometimes they overlap.
Yeah.
Sometimes they overlap, but often not. And so again, trying to develop these skills in order to take and learn about what may be happening and what is happening and what may be going on in actuality beyond the the filters and the prisms, and also just what is relevant in one's own immediate sphere or realm.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that the media has is that it hasn't got time to put anything into context, and it's context blind. So it's very, very left-brained. We've got to get a story out. We've got to get a story out. We've got to get a story out. And it's looking at a very narrow viewpoint, which is a left-brain way of doing things, and doesn't take time to reflect. That's why, a really good journalist who can do that and write articles. They're not so much journalists as opinion or article writers. They do that, and they're the best things to read in newspapers, because they have thought about something and tried to put things in context and point out things. But you don't see it on television, really. Very rarely do they have a good documentary, for example.
Where the news is concerned, hard news, as opposed to, say, longer form journalism, brevity is of the utmost importance. And that's become even more the case now since the internet came around and people's attention spans have shortened. And so whether it's television or, again, just more like print and online hard news, what you learn as a journalist is to sort of stick to the facts, and they kind of give you only what you sort of really need to know about the actual event. But, often a lot of these stories have so much background to them and so much lead up, sometimes in terms of years or even decades. And so in order to fully understand exactly what is happening and why and the reasons, and to be able to see an issue or a debate or a question from many different angles, you have to get into that context. And that's not really very possible in a 2.5-minute report from a reporter in the field or an 800-word article in a newspaper. And it's going to be more the longer form magazine articles and or the longer documentary videos and films that some of these news stations air in their off hours that will give one more background and more context, and thereby better represent the story than the actual hard news itself.
You think it's money driven? They've got to make a profit, haven't they? Because they're all commercial now. Even the BBC is very, very commercially orientated. It's it has all its adverts for its programs, and it's in competition with commercial stations.
It is a business and it is an industry, and they all, I guess, have to pay themselves and make a living. They have to compete. The news media is now competing with the entire internet, all of the video streaming services, and Netflix and Amazon Prime and YouTube. I mean, people's attention has never been more scattered in different directions, and so part of the reason they've also gone so sensational and tabloidy, even the more respectable organizations like the BBC and the New York Times, is they're trying to entertain in addition to
part of the entertainment industry. I thought that was very interesting in your book when you were saying one of the reasons that they have a story like COVID or Brexit and they just go on and on and on every day, 7 days a week, and just keeps continuing on, is because they're now in competition with series on Netflix and Amazon and so on that do that. So they have a theme and a story and a sort of cast of characters, and they just make programs about them that go on and on and on. And the news is copying that. And that's something I hadn't thought of before, but it's blindingly obvious when you pointed it out.
I mean, ultimately, it's stories that we are attuned to and attracted to in terms of consuming any sort of content. And news has always had a kind of a story template built into it. I mean, I'm sure if you go as far back as possible to the beginning of news, you would find that. But now that we're competing against these, dramatic serials, whether they be on Netflix or whether they're in podcasts. The tendency is to binge watch or to binge listen. And so I think what's happened now is the news, at least on television anyway, leading the way as an entertainment medium, has tried to draw out stories day after day, week after week, and sort of, moving the story forward and having a hero and a victim and a villain.
And it's cheaper too, isn't it?
You're in a way expending less effort by building on something that you already know about and talking to reporters who have already been assigned to something and are already working on it. It is in a way sort of a kind of inefficiency in a sense as well, because if every day, if you're constantly shifting the goalposts and changing stories left, right, and center, different parts of the world, you're consuming more resources and energy and probably spending a lot more money, which is the reason why the weather is always something that is a good topic as well, because it's cheap to produce, and there are approaches and topics that are just easier than others.
Have you got a view as to how all this is going to end up for the human race, having this kind of approach to news and as part of the entertainment industry, and how it whips up people and influences politics and people's behavior on the streets?
Well, I think we've already started to see its effects. And I think the polarization of society, I'm almost certain is at least partly attributable to the way the news is being reported. There is the social media side of things, but they go hand in hand, because social media is a vehicle for news stories. And I think it is dividing people. I think as news organizations become more desperate for eyeballs and for clicks and are resorting to more sensation to reach their viewers, and they're going more ideological in their various slants, their audiences are becoming silos. And so and then what ends up happening is people become divided. Whereas again, if you go back into the past, there were not as many options. Most organizations more or less had the same message, even though they may have slightly differed a little bit on the political spectrum. And so I just think there's a lot of division as a result of the polarizing of the message. And so that's going to lead to conflict. It's going to lead to disagreement within society on how to do things or what to do. Because if there isn't any kind of a consensus, even with political differences, you can't run a society.
No, that's right. Everything's fragmented now, with identity politics and views about climate change and all the other things that are going on, the pandemic. That has split people, who used to be friendly and made them less friendly with one another, to put it mildly, sometimes quite aggressive to one another. And that's horrible. But it's really has been whipped up by the news media to a considerable degree, I think.
It's begun. We've seen it. We don't even really have to talk about how it's manifested. I think everybody knows.
Yeah.
And more than knowing, I'm sure many find themselves on one side or another, with one group or another. And I'm sure that also has the effect of turning people off the news as well. I think a lot of people's disgust or disenchantment is a result of seeing the implications of that.
Yeah.
And if that continues, then it's going to have even additional implications, I think. I think news organizations have to up their game.
They certainly do. I think that's a good place to end talk. And I think it's brilliant, your book. I hope lots and lots of people buy it and read it. It's very thought-provoking.